imagine a company HR department, right? They're furiously hiring external candidates from all over the world,
Oh, yeah.
while simultaneously holding these massive all-hands meetings to warn the current staff that half of them are about to be replaced by robots?
Right. I mean, you'd think the CEO had completely lost their mind.
Or that they actively hated their employees?
Yeah.
Why on earth would leadership deliberately stoke that kind of anxiety?
Well, it's a scenario that seems completely irrational until you look at the underlying power dynamics.
Yeah,
Because if you view it through the lens of, maximizing leverage over those employees, suddenly that cruelty starts to look like a deliberate strategy.
exactly. And today, we are looking at a highly provocative thesis that claims this is exactly what Washington is doing to the American public right now. Welcome to our deep dive.
Got to be here.
We're unpacking a recent, incredibly dense monologue by political commentator Tucker Carlson, alongside his in-depth interview with former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Green. Now, right up front, we need to be incredibly clear about our mission today.
That's right. Because the political claims in these materials are intense. I mean, they touch on some of the most heated debates in the country.
Oh, absolutely.
So our goal on this deep dive is absolutely not to endorse or reject these viewpoints. We aren't here to take political sides or tell you what to believe.
Right, this is strictly about acting as impartial guides. We want to help you understand the exact mechanics of the arguments Carlson and Green are making regarding immigration, foreign policy, and the hidden power structures of Washington.
Which is a lot to cover.
It is. And this whole thesis really kicks off with a visceral scene. It's the October 2024 Donald Trump rally at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, Carlson uses that rally as the inciting incident for his entire argument. You had this massive, enthusiastic crowd holding up campaign-provided signs that read, mass deportations now.
And he doesn't just frame that as a catchy political slogan.
No, not at all.
He describes it as a deep, visceral reaction from everyday voters who desperately want to reassert control over their own country's laws.
Right. I mean, think about it from the perspective of an average citizen.
Yeah.
You live in constant fear of breaking some obscure tax law or accidentally violating a local environmental regulation.
And facing massive fines for it.
Exactly. So Carlson asks, if citizens are held to that brutal standard, why shouldn't foreigners who actively break immigration laws face immediate consequences?
Right. It raises a fundamental question about the social contract.
It does. He's arguing that the people born in a country should inherently get to decide who else is allowed to live there.
Makes sense on paper.
Right. And if a population explicitly does not want radical demographic change, he asks why a government, which he characterizes as a rogue administration, by the way, gets to deny them that right.
But, the crowd's reaction at that rally really just serves as a launchpad. Because Carlson takes that raw desire for border enforcement and crashes it right into a staggering economic paradox.
The AI paradox.
Yes, currently being pushed by the leadership class in Washington.
Okay.
Let's unpack this, because this is where that HR analogy I mentioned earlier comes in.
Yeah, the contradiction is just glaring. On one hand, you have political leaders allowing hundreds of thousands of H-1B visa workers into the country.
And for those who might not know, the H-1B is a specific visa largely used to bring specialized foreign workers frequently from India right into American tech jobs.
Exactly. And at the same time, the administration is extending temporary protected status, or TPS, for hundreds of thousands of Haitians.
Which is basically a government designation that allows foreign nationals to live and work in the U.S. temporarily, right?
Yeah, usually if their home country is facing a crisis like a war or a natural disaster.
So we have this massive influx of foreign labor being legally greenlit by Washington. But they are doing this at the exact same moment that these very same leaders are aggressively warning us about artificial intelligence.
AI is about to wipe out 50% of white-collar American jobs in the next 2 to 3 years. That's the warning.
Which is terrifying.
Right. The timing is what Carlson finds so suspicious and, frankly, dangerous. He contrasts this modern approach with how Franklin Delano Roosevelt handled mass unemployment during the Great Depression.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, when FDR was faced with millions of out-of-work citizens, he created the Civilian Conservation Corps. He actually had General Douglas MacArthur lead it.
Right, to mobilize these unemployed men.
Yeah.
Because millions of unemployed, desperate young men represent a massively volatile force.
They can completely destabilize a country.
Absolutely.
So FDR's logic was to put them to work rebuilding national infrastructure, giving them purpose and a paycheck to prevent domestic unrest.
And Carlson points out that our current leaders are doing the exact opposite.
Literally the opposite. They are actively stoking anxiety about AI job losses, while simultaneously importing foreign labor to compete for a rapidly shrinking pool of jobs.
Okay, so based on the source, why would any leadership class do this? I mean, I know we often chalk bad policy up to short-sighted corporate greed.
Just wanting cheaper labor, yeah.
Exactly. But is Carlson alleging something darker here?
What's fascinating here is that he explicitly rejects the idea that this is just incompetence or standard corporate penny pinching.
Really?
Yeah. Carlson posits that this is a deliberate humiliation exercise.
A humiliation exercise. Wow. That is a heady accusation.
It is. The allegation is that the leadership class actively holds deep contempt for the American public.
So it's personal.
In this view, yes. They aren't trying to comfort the public about the massive economic disruptions of AI. They are intentionally demoralizing them.
Because by forcing citizens to compete with imported labor for a shrinking pie,
Right.
the elite are essentially showing the public exactly how little they are valued.
Exactly. And a demoralized population, the argument goes, is much easier to manage.
Okay, so if we follow that logic, this idea of elite contempt, it naturally brings up the question of loyalty.
Right.
If the elite's loyalty isn't with the American citizen, where is it? And this is where Carlson targets what he calls neoconservative politicians.
Right. So neoconservatives are generally defined as politicians and thinkers who strongly advocate for an aggressive, hawkish foreign policy.
Heavy global intervention.
Yeah, and a massive focus on funding foreign allies, particularly Israel. Carlson leans heavily on the biblical concept that you cannot serve two masters.
Applying it directly to these specific politicians, meaning you can really only have one core loyalty.
Exactly. And if your primary loyalty is to a foreign nation or a global project, you will inevitably develop contempt for the domestic population you are supposed to be serving.
Because you're constantly draining resources from them.
Precisely. He argues that these leaders will endlessly authorize billions to fund foreign conflicts across the globe, but completely ignore catastrophic domestic issues.
Like what?
He points to the opioid crisis, which is killing 100,000 Americans a year, or the absolute hollowing out of the American industrial base.
Tragedies that simply don't register on the neoconservative radar, according to him.
Right, and to back this up, he brings the receipts. He points to a very specific piece of evidence, a 2017 video of prominent neoconservative figure Bill Kristol.
Oh, I've heard about this clip.
Yeah, in this clip, Kristol is quoted describing the white working class in America as decadent, lazy, spoiled, and sitting around clipping coupons.
Wow.
And in the very same breath, he praises immigrants for wanting to come in and work hard.
That is, I mean, Carlson's reaction to that quote must be visceral.
Very. He compares Kristol's attitude to a father who looks at his own unruly, struggling children, decides they are just too difficult to raise, and simply abandons them.
So you can go adopt new, more compliant kids.
Exactly. Carlson literally calls a lighter with that kind of psychological detachment a monster.
Okay, wait, let me push back here for a second, because I feel like we were skipping over a massive historical reality.
Sure.
Isn't there a very traditional, deeply rooted economic argument for immigration here? For over a century, the core argument was that low-wage labor fueled our agriculture, built our railroads, and drove the industrial economy.
Sure.
So isn't Kristol just echoing a ruthless but mathematically true economic reality?
It's a great question, and Carlson actually addresses this exact point head-on.
Okay.
He acknowledges that for generations, the purely economic case for low-wage immigrant labor was, at the very least, coherent. You needed physical bodies to pick crops and work assembly lines.
Oh.
But he argues that this traditional economic case is completely dead today.
Because of the AI and automation we were just talking about.
Exactly. The mechanism has completely changed. Agriculture is largely automated now. He points out that even massive tech behemoths like meta companies that print money, frankly,
Right.
are laying off 8,000 people at a time simply because AI creates ruthless efficiencies.
So Carlson's logic is this. If the historical economic argument for importing labor is objectively invalid in an automated world,
Which he claims it is.
then the continued push for mass immigration by these elites can no longer be defended as good for the economy.
Right. He concludes it must be driven by malice and a deliberate desire for demographic replacement.
Demographic replacement. And that phrase leads us right into what Carlson outlines as a massive, glaring geopolitical double standard regarding ethnostates.
Yes. An ethnostate being a sovereign state where citizenship and political power are restricted to members of a specific racial or ethnic group.
Right.
Carlson claims there is a profound contradiction in how Washington elites treat the demographics of America versus the demographics of our foreign allies.
He calls out specific politicians here, too, like Congressman Don Bacon and Congresswoman Maria Salazar.
Yeah, he does. The claim is that they aggressively push open border policies here in the U.S. And if you dare to criticize those policies, they instantly label you as racist or anti-immigrant.
And Carlson argues the explicit underlying goal of these policies is to actively change America's demographics.
He notes that it is treated as an absolute moral imperative by the elite that America must not remain a majority white nation.
He even throws in an offhand detail about Ukraine.
Right. Yeah, that Ukraine is reportedly planning to import African workers to replace the men they've lost in the war, permanently changing their own demographics and doing so with full Western backing.
But here is the massive contradiction Carlson is highlighting. Those exact same politicians who demand demographic transformation in the U.S. fiercely demand that Israel remain a Jewish ethnostate.
Exactly. Carlson brings up a tweet from Congressman Bacon stating flatly that if you don't believe Israel should exist specifically as a Jewish state, you are anti-Semitic.
It's a complete inversion of values depending on what soil you are standing on.
Yeah.
Carlson is asking why an American leader would hold the preservation of a foreign ethnostate as their absolute highest priority, while viewing the very concept of an American ethnostate, or even just basic border sovereignty, with absolute terror and disgust.
It's a contradiction that is very difficult to defend intellectually. And according to Carlson, because the elite cannot defend this double standard with logic, they have to turn to censorship.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the listener? How does he connect foreign policy debates to the First Amendment?
Well, it's all about how power maintains itself when it's operating on hypocritical grounds.
Right.
Democracy entirely relies on free speech, the ability of everyday citizens to point out these glaring contradictions. But Carlson argues the ruling class is actively trying to shut down that right because the contradictions are becoming too obvious.
He points to conservative commentator Mark Levin, who recently called critics of the Israeli government violent.
Yes, and he also highlights legislation pushed by Congressman Josh Gottheimer and Mike Lawler, specifically the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act.
Right. Carlson claims this legislation is explicitly designed to compel massive tech companies to ban criticism of the Israeli government by redefining that criticism as bigotry.
And this is where the concept of stochastic terrorism comes in. Have you heard that term thrown around lately?
Yes, it's everywhere in political media. It basically means using public rhetoric that is technically legal, but allegedly incites unpredictable random violence from extremists.
Exactly. So Carlson's overarching thesis is that by labeling mere criticism of foreign policy as hate speech or stochastic terrorism, the elite are attempting to strip you of your God-given rights.
They are effectively trying to enslave the population by dictating what ideas are legally allowed to be expressed.
Because if you can't criticize the double standard becomes permanent law.
Okay, so we've laid out what these contradictory policies regarding immigration and AI and who these neoconservative elites.
Right.
But this brings up a massive contradiction that I keep getting stuck on.
What's that?
If these policies, mass immigration, foreign wars, job replacement, are so deeply unpopular with the everyday voters who actually elect these politicians, why do they keep voting for them?
It's the ultimate question.
Why does Washington consistently work against the people who send them there?
That is the perfect pivot to the second half of this deep dive, where Marjorie Taylor Green steps in to provide a deeply cynical insider perspective.
Right.
She argues that the voters aren't their actual bosses anymore. Washington is completely controlled by a political industrial complex.
It's a machine. And she says it's fueled by massive unchecked donor money, the military-industrial complex, big pharma, big tech, and massively influential foreign lobbying groups like AIPAC.
Yeah, and for context, AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It is consistently ranked as one of the most powerful and well-funded lobbying groups in Washington.
Dedicated to strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Exactly. And Green breaks down exactly how these groups enforce compliance from elected officials. It's not just campaign slogans. It's a brutal mechanical process.
She details these off-campus GOP meetings that happen at a place called the Capitol Hill Club.
Oh, this part is wild.
Let's really visualize this process. Imagine you are a newly elected candidate. You just won your grassroots campaign. You arrive in D.C., and immediately you are paraded into a private room filled with wealthy industry executives and lobbyists.
Then you aren't there to pitch them your ideas, you are there to be instructed.
Wow.
Green says these new members are told very clearly to get behind the team.
The unwritten but completely understood deal is simple. You vote to support the industries in that room, and those executives and their spouses will write max-out campaign checks.
Yep. A compliant politician can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single evening of eating appetizers.
And if you don't play ball,
The implicit threat is that you lose committee assignments, you get no funding, and they will back a primary challenger against you.
so Green argues this shadow money completely dictates the votes on the floor.
It does, and she gives a terrifyingly specific example regarding a recent federal mandate.
Listeners, think about your own commute tomorrow morning.
Yeah, pay attention to this.
This mandate requires that by the year 2027, all new cars must have built-in AI technology capable of scanning the driver. And if the AI deems you are impaired or unfit, it will physically prevent the car from starting.
It is essentially a federally mandated government kill switch built into your personal dashboard.
Yes. And Green points out that 57 Republicans voted against an amendment that would have stopped this mandate.
Which is shocking.
One of those Republicans was Brian Jack, a guy who campaigned heavily as a populist, America First conservative.
So why would an America First conservative vote to let the government control your car?
Good question.
Green argues he voted this way simply to climb the leadership ladder. Moving up in Washington requires total, unquestioning submission to the donor class, who in this case likely benefit from the tech and auto contracts.
The machine doesn't just reward compliance, it ruthlessly punishes dissent.
It absolutely does. Green highlights the recent attack on Congressman Thomas Massie as prime evidence of this.
Massie is known as a hardcore libertarian. Right.
Right, and he was one of only 6 members of the House who voted to defund Israel, arguing it wasn't the American taxpayers' burden.
So because he stepped out of line and defied a major donor priority, the machine turned on him.
Completely. Green claims that Chris LaCivita, who is actually a top manager for the Trump campaign, is now actively helping 3 billionaire Zionists fund Massie's primary opponent.
A guy named Ed Galreith.
Right. And the kicker here, according to Green, is that Galreith is so entirely funded by outside lobbyist money that he refuses to even show up for a debate in his own district.
He doesn't need the voters, he has the cash.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Hearing Green describe this, it sounds exactly like a publicly traded company where the CEO has completely stopped answering to the customers who actually buy the product
Yeah.
and is now entirely controlled by a shadow board of directors who secretly write the operational budget.
That analogy is spot on. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means the traditional left versus right dynamic that we are all taught to argue about is largely an illusion.
So Green and Carlson are portraying a uniparty system.
The uniparty, meaning behind closed doors, they all work for the same board of directors.
Right. And the system breeds laziness. Think about it. Why would a politician fly back to their home district in Ohio or Pennsylvania every weekend, stand in a high school gymnasium, and beg everyday citizens for $50 donations?
When they can just stay in D.C., go to the Capitol Hill Club, and get fully funded by a defense contractor or a foreign lobbyist?
Exactly. The submission to the donors is total, because it is the path of least resistance.
So who does Green blame for building this entrenched, corrupt system? Because this wasn't built overnight.
Right. This leads to the final and maybe most aggressive segment of her interviewed generational warfare.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Green places the blame squarely and unapologetically on the baby boomer generation.
It's a sweeping indictment. She argues that the boomer generation built and actively supports this exact political industrial complex.
But why the boomers specifically, though? Is it just age demographics?
Well, it has to do with how they consumed information. Green suggests they were the first true television generation.
Okay.
And as a result, they consumed broadcast propaganda for decades without the skepticism that the internet age brought.
They continually voted for the establishment politicians who promised them the world on TV.
Right. While those same politicians were quietly creating a $40 trillion national debt and a social security system that is hurtling toward insolvency in the next decade.
So her solution requires a complete generational shift in power.
A huge one.
Green argues that Generation Z, Millennials and independents, who she points out make up 40% of the entire electorate, must form a new political alliance.
And their core strategy can't just be voting for a different party. They have to change the financial mechanics.
They must agree to only support small-dollar candidates who absolutely refuse fake money and corporate donations.
She is essentially calling for a financial boycott of the uniparty machine.
But what's fascinating is how she ends the interview.
Yeah. After detailing this massive, seemingly invincible, billionaire-funded, corrupt machine, she shares a very specific story about her final vote in Congress.
Right, the vote regarding the Protect Children's Innocence Act, which was a bill aimed at federally banning transgender surgeries for minors.
She notes that 4 establishment Republicans, including Mike Lawler, actively voted against her bill.
Yet, despite the Republican establishment fighting her tooth and nail, the bill actually passed the House. Why? Because 3 Democrats crossed the aisle to vote for it.
Although she admits it is now sitting completely untouched in the Senate.
I have to admit, I'm a bit confused by that ending.
How so?
Well, she just spent the entire interview telling us the system is completely rigged by billions of dollars of uniparty donor money, and that these politicians are completely captured.
True.
But then she points to one single bill passing the House as proof the system can be beaten. That feels like a massive leap. Does her overarching argument really justify that kind of optimism?
It is a stark shift in tone, but the mechanism she is highlighting is important. She refers to this as a miracle vote.
A miracle vote.
Yeah, she is using it as definitive proof that the uniparty's grip on Washington, while incredibly strong, is not absolute.
It's a crack in the armor.
Exactly. The takeaway she wants to leave the audience with is that even when the system is heavily rigged by donor money, threat of primary challenges and establishment pressure disruption is still mechanically possible.
The argument is that if good citizens refuse to be complacent, if they reject the propaganda and actively demand representation from people who aren't bought, the system can actually be fractured.
It's a hopeful note to end on, despite the bleak picture she painted.
So, to summarize the incredibly intense and complex arguments we've unpacked today,
Let's do it.
the core thesis presented by Carlson and Green is that a donor-driven political class obsessed with funding foreign wars and maintaining open borders operates with active, deliberate contempt for the American citizen.
Right. They use things like the AI and immigration paradox as proof of this humiliation.
And they argue that the only way to break this deeply entrenched cycle of corruption is through a massive generational alliance that fundamentally changes how political campaigns are funded.
It's a heavy paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
And if Green is right, and the true dividing line in American politics isn't actually Democrat versus Republican, but rather donor-funded versus small-dollar independent life.
Which changes everything.
It really does. It raises a really fascinating question for you, the listener.
Okay.
Next time you see a slick political ad on TV or hear a fiery patriotic speech, instead of asking what political party they belong to, the better question might simply be, who paid for the microphone?
That is the perfect question to leave you with. Next time a politician points an angry finger at an ideological rival, take a step back and ask yourself if you're just looking at a shadow play directed by a donor in the Capitol Hill Club.
Something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking at the mechanics behind the headlines, and we'll see you next time.